Joey Espinosa, what's going on, man?
Not much, man. Just another day. Just another day out in the field dealing with cannabis.
Another day in cannabis, but not every day is different, right? Especially in California, lots going on, lots of changes, lots of things happening, I would imagine.
Yeah. There's a whole lot going on in California right now. The past 18 months for most folks have been really tough because the price of cannabis kind of had a little bit of a collapse, a very big collapse, I should say, around July of 2021. So a lot of the farms I work with out here in Monterey County have been really struggling, trying to survive, trying to find a way to pay all of these bills that they have to pay. And we're just now seeing a little bit of glimmer of hope that the market's getting better. But even if it does get better, it's going to take them some time to bounce back from the past 18 months.
Yeah, I read about that, the price collapse, and I think what the number was is it fell by 8% commercial cannabis sales in the last year, and the state tax revenue dropped by 30 million um, between one quarter, right, from third quarter to fourth quarter. So um, it's tough times, man. And what would you kind of point to as the result, or what's causing this price collapse?
I mean, it's a mixture of things. Obviously the basics of it are oversupply. The basic laws of supply and demand. You had a pretty good year for cannabis in 2020 when COVID hit because cannabis was considered an essential business and was able to continue to operate. And more people were getting stimulus money, more people were staying home, so the sales of cannabis were going up. And I think that kind of bled into 2021 being a pretty good year as well. And in 2021, you have maybe more people that got into it because they heard how good it was. Maybe more people expanded because they did really well that past year. And then when it came towards the end or the summer of 2021, that's kind of when the price started to drop because there was just way too much cannabis on the market. And it kind of happened everywhere, all throughout the country. Oregon has too much cannabis. Oklahoma came online and they produced a ton of cannabis because it's really easy to get a license there and there's no real limit on what you can grow out there. So just kind of the combination of all of it just led to the price dropping very dramatically. Most people I work with are greenhouse growers here in Monterey County, California. And they could probably sell like a wholesale pound of weed for anywhere from $1,200 to $1,400 before the collapse. And then once the collapse happened, they were getting offered 500, maybe 600. For a while, 450 was a pretty common number. So to go from selling 100 pounds and getting potentially $120,000 on that deal to making maybe $50,000, while all of your expenses are increasing with record high inflation, while you're paying all these crazy tax rates and all these other things you have to deal with by being overregulated, it's just a recipe for disaster. So I always say business is hard enough as it is to be a business owner and be in business, but when you add all of these factors that cannabis has to deal with, it just makes the odds stacked against you even more.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, from the banking regulations to, or lack of banking, I should say, to 280E and just all the hurdles that cannabis operators face. It's in addition to what you've talked about. It's difficult, right? I mean, for sure. And you did mention that California is not exclusive to these price collapses. I mean, you mentioned Washington, Oregon. So I mean, and you touched on some of the reasons why, but I mean, would you point to really like unlimited licenses in these states being the major primary factor, or I mean, is it a culmination of
I
things?
mean, yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I mean, so in Oklahoma, yeah, having kind of this unlimited process for licenses and making it so it's only $2,500 to get in it. I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, on one hand, you could say that helped create this oversupply and that harmed people and hurt people. But on the flip side, we're obviously advocating for a more open market. We want to be treated like any other business. So that kind of is like a glimpse of what it probably will be like if that day ever comes. You're going to have a lot more people get into the business, and the price ultimately will go down. On the podcast I haven't done it in a long time, so I say I did. It was called the $1 Pound Show, with the idea being that eventually this will be normalized and the price will be a lot cheaper. So it's just something to think about when we talk about like what is causing the oversupply. How do we get to a point where we're treated like any other commodity without having a ton of people go out of business. I think a lot of small operators in California would answer your question with the fact that these large corporations are able to stack multiple licenses, cause the oversupply, because they had a rule in California where you could only grow an acre. You can only get one medium license, which is an acre, and you weren't allowed to get more than one. But you were able to get a 10,000 square foot license and get basically as many as you wanted. And so that's what happened, where you had a ton of these farms that came in and just got a ton of licenses, namely in places like Santa Barbara. Mendocino's on the top 5. Humboldt, obviously those are probably smaller growers, but Santa Barbara, Monterey County were probably the two that were like large commercial size operations. So it's been interesting to see how this all plays out, and going to be interesting to see how the future looks if it does become normalized, like I said.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and that's really interesting, like how the size of the grow operation, like how they're dealing with it, right? Because I mean, it sounds like the micro growers, the small mom and pops, like those are the ones that are really affected, obviously, and then maybe the larger MSOs are just kind of buckling down and holding on for dear life. I mean, what are you seeing in terms of their business strategy across the board?
I mean, yeah, it seems like the MSOs are for sure buckling down, maybe limiting. The MSOs always tripped me out. I guess the business model was just market share, market share, market share, worry about profit later, which I guess I get. But I always was like, my mind was always blown at how much money they would raise and how much money they would lose, and how when I looked at some of their business plans, I'm like, that you're definitely spending more money than you're going to be making. So to see them now suffer through it is interesting. I think a lot of them are also struggling. I know some for sure, that I see in my region are struggling. The question is, do they have enough money to keep bleeding through and survive all this? And then the small mom and pops, like you said, for sure are having a very difficult time. There are people I work with that are, just because they have a large farm in Monterey, it doesn't necessarily mean they're like a big corporate cannabis. A lot of these farms out here were already family owned. A lot of these operators were people that came from the Prop 215 days that maybe started with, a 40 lighter, worked up to 100 lighter, and now here they are running a huge greenhouse operation. So even people that you think that are mom and pop today are probably bigger than we've ever traditionally seen. But they're definitely both suffering for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, did I hear you correctly that price collapse is starting to suppress at this point and starting to turn around? Or I mean, and
Yeah,
if so, like, what does that look like? How long do we have for it to kind of normalize?
I'm not too sure. So basically, now you got more people that are looking for cannabis. One way to tell is if if you haven't heard from someone in like a year or 2 years, maybe someone that you were selling to regularly, and now all of a sudden they're hitting you up because they're looking. That's one way to know, okay, the market's turning. People are definitely getting a little bit better pricing, but still nowhere near what they got before. Like there's no one out here that's getting 1,200. If it gets back to that point, I'd be surprised. I think it's still going to stay just under the $1,000 threshold. And when I say this, I'm speaking towards the greenhouse. Obviously, indoor is a higher ticket than greenhouse, but
Sure.
So it's just basically more people, more demand. You can feel that there's more demand, and ultimately you're getting a higher price point now. And what's interesting is we're kind of going through that stage where the buyers are either in denial or trying to hang on to these low prices because they don't want to accept that the market has shifted and now growers can get a higher ticket than they used to. So it takes a little bit of time for those buyers to kind of just get with the program and realize that this is the way it is. But we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes through the summer, because aside from the pricing in California, another problem is the regulatory framework and the sunsetting of provisional licenses. Most people have been operating with provisional state licenses in California, which basically means that you're in this interim period where you're trying to get a environmental study done by your local jurisdiction for your property. There's something called the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, we call it, and that's a requirement for a lot of these projects where you have to review all of the impacts on the environment for the project, compare, what existed at this place before cannabis, what's going to exist after, and it's just a long bureaucratic process that has been really slow for people. So that's why they had a provisional license. Well, this year, if you have more than 22,000 square feet, you will not be able to renew as a provisional license. You'll have to become an annual license, which essentially means you've finished all your local requirements, the biggest one being completing the CEQA. So there's a lot of farms and jurisdictions that are way behind, that are not going to be able to get everything done in time. And so the state will not renew their licenses. And we've already started to see a huge drop off of licenses in the state,
So
even though we're only 3 months in.
let me pause you real quick because I want to make sure I get
Yeah.
this correctly. So what you're saying is the CEQA was a requirement by the state, but it took so long that, and they realized that they instituted provisional licenses so they could operate in the interim, and now they've eliminated the provisional license and now reinstated the requirement, and it's like good luck is what you're saying.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, basically that's what's going on. So
Wow.
you have two, two lanes on that, right? One lane is the small farmer who's like, great, screw these guys anyway. If you're growing more than 22,000, you're too big and we don't want that. You have the other lane that people are more than 22,000 and are like, dang, what am I going to do? I've already invested in this, right? I already have a lease for a huge greenhouse property. I've already done a huge power upgrade. All these things that I have to do to get my business to where it needs to be. So what do you mean you might take away my licenses? So it's a scary thing. I believe it was around 836 licenses that we've lost so far, the first 3 months of this year. So half of those are coming from Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara was the most licensed county in the state for a long time, Humboldt being the second. So it's, again, if it's not the taxes and the price of everything that's going to take you out, just these requirements that we're seeing are going to take a lot of people out. Luckily, Monterey County is starting to work with their operators a little bit more than before. Monterey County had finished the CEQA study, but a lot of people hadn't finished, local requirements like fire sprinklers. Maybe you have to update a septic system on your property. Maybe you have to do driveway improvements to make sure your asphalt touching the public road is clean and not all potholey. So the county is getting a little bit better and giving people more time and working with them out here, but other jurisdictions are still, going to have a tough time. We're going to see what happens when we get through the summer. A lot of licenses expire in the summer. So we'll see.
Yeah, it seems like time will tell during that period. I want to press deeper and just, I mean, you've touched on, high taxation. We've touched on the license issue, right? And kind of the whole CEQA requirement. And what are some other challenges that operators are facing in California? Like, for instance, the emerging, I wouldn't even say emerging, the strong black market, right? And like how that's really undercutting a lot of the legal cannabis sales. And then maybe some other legislation that's been debated or proposed that, in your view, would be more of a detriment to the industry.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as the illegal market, I mean, I have a very anti-war on drugs mentality when it comes to that. I think it's 60% of the taxes raised in California are supposed to go towards fighting the illegal market. I think that having that prohibitionist war on drugs mentality has proven to not work. I mean, for probably at least half a century now, if not longer. And so I think
Well, what's
that
the answer though, right?
yeah, I
Like,
think that the government needs to find a way to lower the barriers of entry, to make it easier for people to get into a legal cannabis situation, to make it less expensive, which all that's going to take time to play out. I think we can get there. I don't think we'll ever be there as much as we want, but I think we can get to a better place, but it's going to take time. So I think that has to happen. On the flip side, though, I can understand frustrated operators who say you're in down in Southern California and LA, and you've worked so hard to get to this point where you get a legal licensed dispensary. You've spent tons of money. Maybe you've paid a lease for a year or 2 years while you're waiting to get permitted. So you finally get there, and then there's still this proliferation of illegal dispensaries, maybe even around the corner from you. So I can't understand that frustration, and that's why I see both sides, but I always lean towards finding a way to make it easier for people. I think we have to fight it through economics, not through, you're going to get locked up in a cage, or we're going to have law enforcement come kick your door in. That's what I really think needs to happen when it comes to the black market. And funny enough, when we're talking about this collapse, it happened in both markets. So the black market suffered as well from the oversupply, which I think is an ironic thing not a lot of people talk about. Like if I'm law enforcement and I'm looking at how we can fight this industry, all you had to do is basically just let people go wild and grow a ton of weed, and they start to take themselves out because the market comes in and it makes it not feasible to continue to operate. So there are people in the illegal market who went out of business as well as the legal market, and so that's something that's interesting to think about as well when we discuss these things.
Yeah. Well, and I get your view, like fight it through economics, and I agree completely. And I'm just curious. So like what's the appetite in terms of the openness at the state elected official level? Like it seems to me on the outside that the politicians in California are doing more to basically erode the legal cannabis industry in California due to the high taxation and all the hurdles and red tape that we've talked about with regulations that just kind of don't make sense, right?
Yeah.
But like when I know that y'all are advocating and you're out there talking with them, like, do they comprehend how much they're fucking this up, or like?
I think some of them do, but I would have to say it's not entirely, a state issue. It's a local issue. One of the things with what we have is in California, we have local control. So cities and counties can make their own rules. They can be more restrictive than state law, but not less restrictive.
Right.
And so what you had was when Prop 64 passed, you had a lot of people that actually decided to ban cannabis in their city or county. One of the big issues is we don't have enough retail outlets. That's not really the state's fault. That's locals' fault, right? So it's something that we have to try to figure out to attack through the local level. I think more people should get involved at the local level. Like you said, a lot of people are going there talking to the representatives, but not really locally. There's not a lot of people that are going to city council meetings or keeping up with their board of supervisors. And I think more people could and should do that. And that's something that we have to do. Because again, when we're talking about over taxation, that also is at the local level. So if you're a retailer, you're paying 15% to the state, you're paying the state sales tax, and you're paying probably another 5 or 10% on top of that for the local city or county that you're in. So you have, layers of taxes that are to blame because of the locals as well. And so that's what I think we need to focus on, attacking this at a local level, getting more organized locally. Because if we can't even do it locally, then, how effective are we going to be in Sacramento?
Yeah. That's a great point that you bring up. And in my view, I think it's really a like an adult use rollout killer, right? If when you're rolling out in a new state and you add that provision into the bill that you can allow local municipalities to vote to either opt out of cannabis or not, it's a huge, huge problem. And one thing I'm really happy about is in New Mexico, where I grew up and where I also have a product that we're selling. They debated that before they passed the bill, and that was one thing where it was held up. You know what I mean, at the Capitol, and they just said we're not going to move forward if we add that provision. And I'm so glad that they didn't. It's unfortunate, obviously, that California had to go through those growing pains, but I'm hoping that other states that come online in the future understand the severity of that provision if it's passed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and there's been some attempt at trying to fix that. I believe it's Assembly Member Ting, Ting. He had a bill, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago now, and it was basically to try to force the locals to open it up. So it was something along the lines of, if you guys don't want to allow it, you can't just have your city council or board of supervisors vote on not allowing it. You have to actually run a ballot initiative, and you have to let the people of your city or county decide if they want to ban it, which I thought was a pretty good step in the right direction to try to solve the problem. I know the bill didn't make it far enough to get approved anyway. I don't know exactly where it fell off, but there are some people at the state level that I feel like are doing a good job and trying to bring good legislation forward to solve these things. Assembly Member Ting being one of them. So like I said, we'll get there. It's just the problem is all this takes a lot of time. And right. I think that's the big issue with Prop 64. There's a lot of issues. A lot of people could complain about it, but the issue is that it's not one and done. We're legal and we're done here. There's still more work to do. There's still more fine tuning to do. And the state's getting there. I think they're making changes that are positive, but it just takes a long time. So for example, one thing that happened recently was the track and trace regulations had where when you harvest your plants, you have to input the wet weight of every single plant that you have individually. You can't just like harvest a row of 100 plants weigh it all and say that's how much it weighed. You had to know how much each individual plant weighed. And that
Oh
was a
my
ridiculous
gosh,
regulation.
that is time consuming. I can't imagine, right?
Yeah, especially again when here in Monterey we're in these large commercial greenhouses, so we're talking about 50, 100,000 square feet of plants.
Oh
So it was a
my
really stupid
god.
regulation, and they eventually changed the regs and got rid of the requirement and allowed you to basically weigh all of it together. Um, so things are getting
It's a
better,
win. Yeah.
but what's messed up about it is that I haven't lost sight of things were so terrible that any little basic common sense thing makes me feel like, hey, things are getting
For
better.
sure, man. Hey, yeah, you take it as a win. I'm not laughing to downplay it. I'm just surprised. I had never I might have heard it, I forgot, but that's crazy, right? Like if you think about it from a common sense perspective. So it is a win that you don't have to do that anymore. Because
Yeah.
I would imagine hours upon hours of just one plant at a time, like you said, with major commercial grow operations. I mean, that's not feasible, right?
No, and
Um,
the problem is when they make, going back again to the spirit of lowering the barriers to entry and all that, when you make the rules so stupid and so ridiculous, um, most people probably aren't going to follow them. So
right,
I
right.
think the DCC knows there are plenty of operators out there that probably didn't weigh every single plant. And that's part of why they changed the reg, because they're like, do we really need this reg? We know people probably aren't doing it, and they made the right decision and they got rid of it. So over time we're seeing things that are going to be better. It's just taking forever. There's another bill that just came out called AB 1111, which would allow the DCC to issue small producer event sales licenses. So this would basically allow a small grower to go to a cannabis event, a licensed cannabis event, and sell their products directly to the consumer. So some people are arguing that that's great, that's much needed, that's how it should be. Other people are arguing that that's not fair, that the retailers work really hard to get their retail licenses and they don't want to be undercut. So that's
Right.
going to be an interesting one to follow, because I think we have two different camps on that one in the industry that are kind of on both sides. But overall, I think the fact that the state's even entertaining things like that and introducing bills like that is showing that it's going towards the right direction to try to make the industry better here. Um,
Totally.
it's just, again, takes forever. Dealing with the government, it's depressing sometimes because of how slow things are. It's hard to be innovative. It's hard to do a lot of things at a fast pace when you have to deal with the government every day.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine. But no, you're totally right. And the fact that this is even a topic of conversation is great, right? Because it's kind of top of mind and it's something that's relevant and it could really change and help the industry like you're talking about. I also want to get your thoughts on I mentioned this several times. I had Peter Sue on and he's the one who kind of dropped this number for me, the illegal California cannabis showing up in New York. I think the number was like 1,400 illegal dispensaries. Now, I'm not saying those are all, California affiliated dispensaries, but there is a lot of product flowing from California to New York. I would imagine because of what we've been talking about, right? And just the challenges that these operators are facing, they're trying to find another market to kind of, boost profit share, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess what's new to that situation is you're having stores that are popping up over in New York, but the idea of cannabis going to New York is, that's been happening forever. That's
Right.
that's how it
Right.
worked, right? You grew it on the West Coast, you sold it on the East Coast, so you can get the biggest profit margin.
But it's
Uh,
just wild to me that like some of the product is scanned. It's like it's already in the Cali system, is what I've heard. Like it's
yeah,
packaged
yeah,
and
yeah.
so
I guess there's like multiple scenarios. Is it someone bootlegging product? Is it somebody that's in playing both markets, which we know that's probably happening? Is it getting over there and then getting packaged in that product? I don't know. But yeah, it's interesting to see. And just another example of, if we made it more accessible on the East Coast, we can also help fight the illicit market. You can't just legalize everything on the West and make it illegal in the East. And I think we're getting there slowly. That's one thing I think that will happen over time, is more states will come online ultimately, and we will put the federal government, into a position of like, well, okay, now what are you going to do if 45 states have medical or
right.
recreational laws? Now you have to do something, right? Because you've got almost every single state. So I don't know that they're going to do it themselves. Them being Congress, I think it's going to be more of a push from all the states just doing it themselves.
Yeah, I'm in that camp with you. I've said that before. I think that, I mean, what, there's 19 adult use states online, 36 medicinal, I think maybe.
Sounds about right.
But like once we hit that 25 and above on the adult use side, it's going to be like pushing the federal government in the corner and going, like you said, all right, what are you going to do about it now? Because like, the states have spoken at this point, basically. And we're not far off from that. I mean, we're like, that's only 6 states that need to flip, and that can happen very soon. So that's exciting, I think, and encouraging to think about.
And I think piggybacking off of that is the states that start to entertain allowing interstate commerce. So, which has already slightly happened. I think Washington had a bill, California had a bill. Some of them say something like, "We just want to build the framework and have the okay in our systems, so that when the feds allow it, it's already kind of there." But other states, I think, eventually are just going to do it, and so that's going to be the real like, did we cross the line with the federal government? Because if two states agree to import and export cannabis amongst each other, now we're not only breaking one federal law, we're breaking another federal law. And by us, I mean the states themselves. So that's going to be, I think, a really interesting time. I feel like that will probably happen before
I
the
think
federal
you're
government
right.
allows it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, even in before the states, like we talked about, the majority of the 50 states flip. I think that you're right. It'll be a Washington or a California entering an agreement, or an Oregon and a California, right? Um, I just don't know. Like, I see it. I see that. I see interstate commerce as an early adopter being good, obviously, because it's going to push the federal government, like we talked about, to really make some moves. But at the same time, I'm conflicted with it, because I know it's the inevitable, and that's where we're going to go. But I want that little period in between where you try the Oregon cannabis from the micro growers, you try the New Mexico cannabis, you try the California weed. You know what I'm saying? So you kind of get a mix and a flavor. I feel like once full blown interstate commerce happens, it's going to be like, the alcohol industry, where it's like, okay, you've got your standard beers, you got your, you know what I'm saying? Like, where you've just got
Yeah.
your domestics, so the MSOs really kind of win at that point, which again, it's inevitable. I understand, but I think I'd like some growing in between that. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing will probably happen organically anyway. I don't think the import export will all happen quickly. But I know what you're saying. I think um, I think there will always be a place though for you're just when it happens. Let's fast forward. You can buy weed at 7-Eleven. I think you'll still have a market for the craft side of it, right? Just like they have craft beer. So if you're someone
Right.
who's more, what you just described is basically a craft connoisseur type of person. You will be the guy that goes to the store, pays more attention to what am I buying? Was this grown in Oregon? Is this a big grower? Is this a small grower? So I know what you're saying, and I think that's how it's going to go organically. But even when it is big, I think there'll still be room for that. There'll still be consumers that want to focus on those things. You don't want to go buy from the Coca-Colas of the world. You want to buy from a small brewer.
Right. Well, I appreciate that, man. You make me feel better. The future is bright. Well, and
Yeah.
speaking of the future, I want to get your thoughts. So, the future of cannabis as an industry in America, like, pull out your crystal ball, right? I mean, we've kind of touched on where we think potential federal reform will happen, right? But like, what else are you envisioning for the future of cannabis?
You mean just like how long it'll take or just what will happen?
Like, I mean, everything, right? So I guess we kind of talked about how long it'll take, or what could happen in terms of the reform, but like, what does the market look like, right? Like, what does the world look like with cannabis being legal at a national level?
I don't know. I think it's funny question because it feels like it kind of already is, right? Like we've already like as a society decided that these laws are stupid and most people are already
It is,
experiencing.
yeah, it is, but it's not though, right? Because like, it's like no one cares anymore that people consume. I agree with you there. I don't know if you're partly saying that, but I
Yeah.
I think that the overall adoption, or the stigma is still there, right? Like there's still people that are kind of curious, but because of the federal illegality, they just have that hard line of no, right? And they'll never even consider, or because they're just, they want to follow the rules and they want to not, to not get in trouble. So I think that once that barrier is broken, it'll be a different landscape because more people will have actually consumed and tried it and experienced it, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to just being, I don't care. Like you do what you need to do. In
Yeah,
that
I see what you're
world,
saying.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you're saying like more people will be introduced to it because it won't be as scary. And if more people are introduced to it, then the industry itself grows. More people are maybe going to be more supportive of it. Um, and yeah, I think that will happen for sure. I think the big thing I guess that will change is that hopefully when we get to that point, we'll be able to have more proper research. I know there's been a lot of research in other countries, but obviously the FDA in America like to have their own stuff. So once we get to the point where America can do its own studies, that's going to be huge. And I think that's really where things are going to change a lot. And
Right.
there's probably going to be some studies that are not going to be positive, and that I think the industry needs to
Sure.
be aware of that and accepting of that because not everything is innocent. There's moderation to everything you do in life, so it's going to be important to know and gain more understanding of this plant and gain more knowledge is going to be huge. So I would probably say that's one of the biggest things I'm looking forward to as we get this to this point, as it grows, as more things come online, just getting more of an understanding of it, I think is going to be huge.
Mm-hmm. That's well said, man. I couldn't agree more, Joey. Well, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with the floor. Is there anything that you want to, leave the audience with before we go?
Um, yeah, I would say, feel free to reach out to me. Cannabispermits.com, at cannabis permits on Instagram. I always say that even if you're not someone who wants to start a cannabis business, I like to talk to people like you and I just did. I like to help people if I can, going back to that local control side of it, learning how you can get involved, learning what it takes to go to city council meetings, board of supervisor meetings, just having a more understanding of how your local government even works. Because for me, I didn't even really know how local government worked. I didn't pay attention to it before cannabis. And then once I got into cannabis and I wanted to get into the legal side of cannabis, I learned all about how that works. And so it's something that I think more people should learn about and more people should get involved in. So that's one of my big messages. I would say just, feel free to reach out if you have more questions about that. I want to learn how to get more involved.
Perfect. And they can get a hold of you on cannabispermits.com. Is that the best place?
Yeah, cannabispermits.com. Joey at cannabispermits.com if you want to email me. Feel free to reach out, and I'm always here to help people.
Awesome. Joey, it's been a pleasure, man. I really enjoyed talking with you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. Yep. Let's do it again soon.
For sure.
And thank you all for listening. Bye.